The summit is really a community-focused event where we bring together technical practitioners to sort of share best practices and learn from one another and discuss a lot of the trends that are really shaping the future of our industry. And I really wanted to start off today by just saying thank you to all of you for coming out today. Recognize you all have very busy schedules. I know some folks traversed continents and oceans to be here today, and so we greatly appreciate you coming out and looking forward to today's sessions. The first thing I wanted to show everyone is just kind of some insight into who we have in the room today. I've done this every year, and I kind of make the same comment every year, but I think it's more true now than ever. This is our largest summit to date. Just incredibly humbled to be joined by such an impressive group of companies and logos. Just to give you a sense, we have about 195 unique companies attending today, and about 175 of those are VC-backed startups, representing about $36 billion in funding. And then we also have another 15 large enterprises representing about $11 trillion in funding. Actually, quick show of hands, who in the room is a VP or AI or product leader? Okay, so that's pretty good. So overall, we had about 80% of our total RSVPs were either sort of VP plus technical or product leaders. So really amazing group of folks from an amazing set of companies all under one roof. So super excited to get things started today. Before we kick off, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends and some of the themes of today's summit and sort of how we're bringing it all together. But just wanted to also make the note that look, the point of today is to have fun. So we're kind of taking a break from our normal day-to-day. We're going to break bread together. We're going to have some drinks later on. We're going to hear from some amazing speakers. But just before we do that, again, I want to kick off and talk a little bit about some of the trends and themes for today's event. So I think, you might recall, for those of you who were here last year, we were just kind of getting started on this whole generative AI wave. And just in the last 12 months since we did the last summit, I mean, so much has changed. If I asked folks, even up until January or February of this year, if I asked folks, what is the state-of-the-art model right now, I feel like pretty much everybody across the room would have said GPT. And in the last quarter or so, we've seen some really interesting innovations coming out from folks like Meta with Llama 3 and Anthropic with Claude, Google with Gemini 1.5. So really kind of new foundational models coming online that are really kind of threatening and competing with what was the state-of-the-art even 6 months ago. Context window sizes last June were, the state of the art was like 100,000 tokens. Now there's several models that have, can support million-plus token lengths. Then there's fully kind of multimodal models now coming online with GPT-4o and others. And so the pace of innovation here is really incredible, and this chart on the page just kind of demonstrates that, but the associated kind of funding and investment in the space is following suit and really outpacing a lot of the other categories in software that we're seeing. We remain incredibly bullish on this space. I think we really see the advent of generative AI models as being sort of the most fundamental shift to the way people are building applications since the advent of cloud or the advent of the internet, or kind of pick your epoch. And we see this as really giving us all sort of superpowers, right? Like, we're able to achieve new features and new functionality that even a year ago would have taken teams of data scientists and weeks of months to deliver. Is now sort of available to us all in sort of relatively easily consumed APIs. However, despite that barrier sort of lowering and kind of the barrier of entry lowering, it remains deceptively difficult to actually build and productionalize these workloads. LLMs, they're general purpose models that we're trying to steer towards these narrower use cases. And the challenge really is, how to build a product, something that's sort of repeatable and trustable around something that's inherently non-deterministic, and something that will almost certainly get things wrong from time to time. And so, this is something, I mean, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek gif on it, but this is something that we, virtually every company in this room is thinking about and struggling with and trying to figure out how to sort of overcome and react to. Teams are really, last year I think was a lot of experimentation. Teams are really now moving past that into more of productionalization, and that's kind of the theme and what we're calling kind of phase 2 of adoption. And I'm not just talking about low-hanging fruit, things like applying search to your documentation, but more kind of meaningful use cases that actually sit in the application flow, in the customer flow, and are really providing sort of like meaning value to your end users. And Will Larson is somewhere in here. He's going to be on stage. There he is. pretty soon here to share some principles around how to think about embedding LLMs into your product strategy and some best practices there. And as these new use cases come online, we see people bringing with them concerns about performance and cost and reliability. All of these kind of notions and traditional kind of concerns are now entering the chat as it relates to Gen AI. And the response to this is really a few market dynamics that we're seeing. The first is this idea of this AI engineer. And the idea here is really kind of a departure from a focus on traditional data scientists and ML researchers, and this new role type that's really doing a lot of the kind of citizen hacking work around trying to make the models work, trying to align them, trying to get sort of more value out of them, devising new ways to interact with them that candidly even the people that created the models themselves didn't sort of like conceive of. And this whole phenomenon is giving rise to this idea of an AI engineer. Credit to the latent space guys that kind of put this chart together that just explains the different, where this role sits in the lexicon and the different responsibilities and that sort of thing. But suffice it to say, the general idea is the AI engineer kind of sits above the API. So they're interacting with the models as sort of their foundational layer. That's kind of like their operating system and then building applications on top. The second dynamic is this proliferation of new tools. So this is an eye chart. I pulled this from a blog that we recently published about the Gen AI app stack, which is a shameless plug, but encourage everybody to read that when you get a chance. But its capabilities like unstructured ETL and chaining and agent frameworks and LLM firewalls and tracing tools and these sorts of things that are coming online to address a lot of the concerns that I just mentioned. The buyers in this market, so a lot of you that are kind of looking to these tools to say like, okay, how do I leverage these and take advantage of them to harden my use cases, are really faced with a lot of age-old questions, right? It's about build versus buy. It's about platform versus best of breed. It's about, do I trust upstarts versus leveraging my incumbents? But also net new considerations around technical architecture. And that's really kind of a dovetail into the third dynamic, which is about this emergence of these key design considerations and essentially debates on how best to work with the models. And this is things like model selection. Should I be using open source, closed source? Should I be self-hosting? Should I be just consuming APIs? How do I think about securing GPU access in a market that's still relatively supply chain constrained? Grounding techniques, how do we think about RAG versus long context windows? We've got Mark from Gradient speaking later about sort of the benefits of long context windows as an example. More sophisticated kind of complex reasoning capabilities, things like building chains and orchestrating, doing prompt orchestration, these sorts of things. Novel cyber threats, evaluation, which is candidly an incredibly difficult topic in this particular domain when you're working with natural language. So how to think about writing tests, how to measure outcomes, these sorts of things. Lots of debates across these domains, and what we're starting to see is, while there are no standards necessarily, we're starting to see kind of clusters and pockets of people sort of essentially congregating around certain approaches that are becoming kind of de facto standards or de facto common patterns. And that's really what we're going to dive into today. And we've got a really excellent kind of lineup of experts that are going to talk to a lot of these topics. Last thing just about the trends I'll say is it's not all about building Gen AI applications, right? And so everybody in this room is still managing sort of traditional applications, web apps, whatever it is. And software developers are very much being kind of influenced and augmented by AI capabilities as well. And there's an interesting paradox that we see here where on the one hand, you've got these coding utilities that are essentially augmenting a lot of the responsibilities of traditional DevOps, juxtaposed to the fact that a lot of the work around sort of like chaining and building these more sophisticated capabilities with Gen AI requires a lot of human-in-the-loop coding. So kind of an interesting, weird dynamic that's happening there where it's like you've got AI writing code, but then in order to really get the most value out of the AI, you yourself are writing code, whether that's natural language or scripting or whatnot. Kind of an interesting dynamic there and seeing play out. Last year, we had one of the lead researchers from GitHub Copilot speak, and at the time, I don't want to say they were the only game in town, but they were one of kind of the default choices. I think now there's quite a wide variety of coding utilities that have come to market from companies like Poolside and Magic. We have the head of engineering and founder and CEO now of Replit, Amjad, speaking later as our final keynote. They're doing some really impressive things with applying AI to software dev and coding. And we're just super fascinated about where the space is going and sort of the future of agents and use cases like Devin and the potential for building these sort of fully closed loop systems where applications are fully autonomous and they understand new features they need to build, like bugs they need to fix, and can sort of automatically ship these things, test these things, measure them, et cetera. We're not there yet, but it feels like we have kind of all the ingredients, and we're right on the cusp of something that's pretty special. And then in addition to code gen, it's also other aspects of SRE and sort of DevOps disciplines. And so we have Rama, who's going to be giving a talk later from NVIDIA about some of the work her team is doing around applying AI to incident management and SRE and these sorts of things. And so these are kind of the key themes that we see shaping the market right now. Overall, like I said, we're incredibly bullish about these concepts and the way that these things are unfolding. But ultimately, it really takes a village and all of you to kind of deliver on these things and to really learn from one another and define some of those standards and practices that I mentioned earlier. Sapphire, we really take community seriously, and we really believe in being kind of a facilitator of practitioners and bringing you all together and to learn from one another. This is why we created the engineering excellence function. It's really meant to serve all of you. So it's a platform where we provide sort of content and thought leadership. I mentioned the Gen AI piece we just put out. It's access to partners and advisors. It's strategy consultation. And it's peer learnings and bringing folks together. And that's kind of the theme of today.